everybody doing? This room is a little chilly, right? It's so my fingers are kind of freezing, but no, it's totally cool. Um, I am really excited to be a part of this panel. I want to thank the panelists for letting me lurk among them, because the impetus here has really helped us, I think, all put more attention and focus into our process as researchers. And what I'm going to share with you today is part of my process of thinking back through research that I already completed, but now as part of sort of a retrospective, right? I'm working on this work, writing this book or finishing this process, and so it's causing me to think back through how did I come to these conclusions? What was the process of working with these learners on the ground? And how did it help me further along in my ethnographic process? And so you're seeing here that I'm working with Korean learners of Swahili. I ended up doing my research in a study abroad program that I was not a leader of. And so this is sort of the difference here too across the panel. And many of us may have had experiences similar where we attach ourselves to programs that we are not directly leading or responsible for, but then also we have experiences where we are leading those programs. And so we are probably having conversations in our head about what is different about that experience, but certainly there are some differences. And so a good story begins at the end, right? And so here we are, we're already friends, but there was a process to us becoming friends. And any of you who have worked in sort of a path of ethnography have had this experience of getting very close to people, sharing of yourself in order to learn from them about themselves. And so there I am on the left, and this is taking place in Zanzibar, which is just off the coast of the mainland of Tanzania. So to try to get you into the idea of where we are, we're in East Africa, we're a little bit below Somalia, but definitely above Mozambique, okay? And so Ndoto is in the center. She is sort of at the center of this story, if you will, right? She's from Seoul, Korea, and she has come all the way to Tanzania for her study abroad. And what's interesting about her experience is that she has come to this location in order to get more experience with English, but in so doing finds herself needing to study Swahili. And I think this is an interesting part of the story because here we are in one of these, I guess, outer circle context of English speaking, where you have English being spoken as a result of colonial influences in that part of the world and an emerging sort of development and economy related to the use of English. But still, English is not the most spoken language of that context. And so this becomes a part of Ndoto's story. I should also add that Ndoto is not her given name. It was a name she took as a result of studying Swahili in this context. So identities and multiple identities are converging. On the left there is Glory, and Glory was an English language instructor in this context. She also happened to be Ndoto's English language instructor. But because of our similarity in age, we all became really good friends. And we became friends as a result of the project that I was kind of fomenting in this context. And me sort of finding these both to be friendly women, I sort of said, well, hey, I think we should, let's all get pizza one night. And that ends up socializing us, bringing us together, and I think causing moments for further intercultural awareness, heightened intercultural awareness. So let's try to get into this just a bit. I want to sort of say that part of this process of thinking about what I have learned has helped me as a researcher begin to think of myself more overtly as a lifelong language learner and realize that as I am in this work, attending the classes, the same classes that the students attend, sitting in the back, sometimes being treated by the professor or the teacher as an explicit student in that class, I'm also participating in the face work of being a student. And then I am inevitably learning more words, more stuff, more cultural points that put me very much in the position of a language learner. And so that empathy that I can pull out of that experience is also being a part of my ethnographic work with these particular individuals. And so I'm pulling from the Byram et al. Text there, but just to sort of say that it's the skills of discovery and interaction and the critical cultural awareness that I think that I sort of owe particularly to the close friendships that derived from the the ethnographic experience. And so as we sort of go along here, I want to sort of invite each of you, right, to think along with me through your experiences with students, with learners on your campuses, or elsewhere where you go and you interact, because this is a very active process that we are a part of. All right, so taking you to the university now, labeled Kiswahili, as you would sort of say it within the Swahili language, and that word meaning Swahili language, actually, right? So here we are at the University of Dar es Salaam. Inside the classroom is where some of the interesting stuff is occurring. So I went to this context not planning to work specifically with Korean learners. I myself do not speak any Korean, though actually, interestingly enough, I grew up in Southern California where there's a large Korean population, so I learned to say a few things here and there, elementary school and so forth. But this was a total surprise. And what became interesting for me in this context was that we had all four of these students. They did not know each other beforehand, but once they got into this environment, chose names, right? So you have Habiba, Raha, Ndoto, Lulu. Habiba meaning beloved in Swahili, or also being related to Arabic, right? You have Raha meaning happiness, Ndoto meaning dream, and Lulu meaning pearl. And then their teacher, Muhammad, right? All sort of working together to try to create some avenues for learning Swahili. That what was really interesting for me, and you can see my recording device there in the back of the room where I was sitting, and all my notes and everything, is that what it took for me to stay in that environment and make that environment work for myself was an intercultural attitude. And what it took for those learners to come to that environment and remain open to learning Swahili, even though Swahili was not at the forefront of their initial desire for that experience, was also an intercultural attitude. And what has become more and more clear to me is that the type of attitude that we walk into the field with and into the classroom with is related to our habitus, or our habitus, however you want to say that, as researchers, as language instructors and language learners. And that there's some of that that we can't change, but that inevitably sort of comes out in our analysis of this work and in our relating to the folks around us as we try to go about our interviews and observation and so forth. And so I just want to share with you how I derive some self-reflexive insights from interviews and stimulated recall with the learners. I also spoke to their instructor, but I decided I'm just going to kind of hang that interview outside of this talk because I want to focus on what I was able to learn from these young women here. And so this is a moment from one of our interviews together. And Habiba sort of starting things off, she said, "Korean don't know Swahili." And Ndoto chimes in. Lulu says, "My family is very negative." And I sort of say, "Mm-hmm." Lulu says, "My older sister, why? Why going to Tanzania?" Habiba says, dangerous. Tanzania is very dangerous. Mm-hmm. So I'm trying to keep my participation to a minimum. I really want to hear about their prior experience or what was going through their head as they arrived into Tanzania. But Korean usually doesn't know Swahili. And so at this point, there is sort of a check for understanding among their Korean speakership, right? And so saying Swahili itself, they don't know. And so then Lulu tries to jump in there, Swahili, sigan nanbi, right? This word, this phrase meaning waste of time. Waste of time in English, what, right? So she's seeking help from her Korean peers, Korean-speaking peers. And so Ndoto comes back and says, waste of time. And what's really significant about this moment is here they are kind of negotiating across languages, right? We have, in this case, English. We've got, what is it? I'm sorry, Korean. I'm losing my mind up here, y'all. And it's creating an environment where we're able to try to understand each other. But as we continue, I'm realizing that the translation of this comes much better later on, right, when I'm able to sort of sit down and look at it. And that there's a moment where these learners are explicitly challenging cultural, regional, racialized, and ratio-linguistic stereotypes of this particular region in the language, right, through their presence in Tanzania, but also through their explicit talk about having decided to come. And as our interview continues, right, so we've got the tea on the table and the water and the soda and everything, right? I sort of say, hey, you guys want another tea? And the waiter comes along, another tea, yeah. And I say to the waiter in Swahili, asante, thank you. The waiter replies, asante. And then I say to the ladies, water? In English, no, juice? Inatosha is Ndoto's response. There's some laughter at that. Laughter because it's totally culturally appropriate, but it also breaks the English frame in which we were in. And so then I say, well, sawa, sawa, sawa. But this was a moment where we had sort of an intercultural exchange in the midst of having our explicit intercultural engagement. And so as the interview continues, I sort of follow up and I say, well, do you agree with them? Do you agree with these Korean perspectives on Tanzania? Do you feel negative about Africa or Tanzania? And then I sort of try to follow up, try to draw some more out. I say, well, how do you feel about it? Habiba responds, she says, at first in Korea, and she has this really convenient electronic dictionary, so she's pulling that out and thrumming through it, very dangerous. And then Ndoto chimes in with a little bit of nervous laughter. Water, water, not hot water, right? And so really what she's referring to is life in the dorms at the university. Hot water is not so forthcoming, so this is a challenge. This would be a challenge, I think, for just about anybody. But in Tanzania, we've been here, oh, not bad. Not bad, I say, with a bit of alignment there. People is very, and Ndoto translates for her, peaceful, using this word from Korean, bright, but with the meaning of peaceful. And then Habiba comes back and says, kind and peaceful, very good. At first to mambo. And mambo is this word in Swahili. It's a greeting, very casual, very colloquial. It's sort of like saying, what's up, right? And so this is a bit funny in the moment, right? But then Habiba comes back and says, well, they say hi first. They say hi first to us, right? And to me, this is a moment of heightened talk of their intercultural awareness. This is something that they have figured out, they have taken notice of, that in Tanzania, it's expected for you to greet the next person coming up to you. And that this is another one of these things that, forgive me, is noticeable about their time there, an intercultural contrast, if you will. And so just as we're continuing here, Lulu also adds, well, as I'm just working, right? Oh, mambo, ha ha ha, right? And so we're getting this in some stilted English, but we're getting a picture of her being in a situation where then somebody comes up to her and just says mambo, right? This is very different within their mind in contrast to the Korean context, where if you're unknown to the person, then you are not the one to initiate contact with the unknown person. And so what I'm thinking here is that us having had this opportunity for reflection created by the interview has added something to their study abroad experience, right? It has created a moment for pause, for reflection, but then also for a sense of multilingual collaboration. They collaborate with each other, then one of them collaborates with me, and together we're creating all this meaning such that I can understand a bit more about their experience and talk with them about that their observations. So again, here on the university campus. And here in some of the orientation for all of the international students that came to the University of Dar es Salaam during that time period. And what you can see in the room, or maybe surmise, is that in the foreground is Ndoto with her brunette hair, but there's also students from Finland, from Germany, from Austria, from Japan, from the US, and from China, all coming to that space. So even as I'm talking to you about a subset of students, this is a much larger source of intercultural and multilingual learning that's taking place. And so this was a group, the first group of students that I met upon arriving to the University of Dar es Salaam, students all from the US, believe it or not. And it made me think about our goals in study abroad teaching and language teaching, right? That we keep talking about education for intercultural understanding, but I think a challenge for some of our students on the ground, and I had the chance to observe students coming through at least 4 different programs all throughout my time there in Dar es Salaam, was that the ways that we create focus in programs or breakout sessions in programs or moments for students to reflect explicitly about their experience are very different, very varied across programs. And that we want students to use language in socially and culturally appropriate ways, but this is an ongoing challenge for students because of perhaps the ways that we're scaffolding their experience or the intercultural attitudes or not that they come to the location with. Thinking about our learners as intercultural speakers or mediators of complexity and identities, I think this is what's occurring in our interviews with students, right? That we're in some ways approaching them as mediators of complexity, and then we kind of ramp that up by asking all of our crazy questions. At the same time, interfacing with their responses is trying to force us or scaffold our own, as researchers, intercultural mediation as well. And also thinking about these intercultural attitudes again, this willingness to relativize our own values and beliefs and behaviors, this being at the center of our ethnographic attempts, right? But also at the students who are put in these mixed study abroad classrooms, right, with learners from different universities and different countries, but all in a different context. So here you have some students here at the board doing some conjugation. And one of the things that I enjoyed along the way, and I wrote about this in the abstract for the talk, was that the more I talked with the Korean learners, the more they started to let me into their thinking and their experience. And so one of the things that Ndoto shared with me as we were looking back, doing some stimulated recall at video from their classroom, was she said, you know what, yeah, I had my notes out, and I said, well, can you share your notes with me? Like, what do you got there? So she showed me how she had been sort of putting together an accounting of numbers in Swahili, but also with her Korean reference. And what it made me more aware of, and I don't know why I hadn't been thinking about this before, but it made me more aware of kind of that multilingual challenge, if you will, in the classroom, right? Going to a context where Korean is not widely spoken and having to learn a new language through the frame of a language that's already an additional language for you. So what I'm really saying is here they are in a situation where their language instructor has no knowledge of Korean and is using English to supplement his teaching of Swahili. And so having this opportunity to interact closer with her brought her multilingual challenges and this sort of multilingual tax to my attention. And it's something that I have decided as sort of an explicit ethnographic approach to dramatize, if you will, in my written ethnography of my experiences with these students. And so some of the dorms on campus. And here we're pulling out of campus because I want to sort of share just this last part of the story with you. And you'll notice that on campus, you have a roving troupe of monkeys that are local to campus. And at lunchtime, they come out and grab whatever's left off your plate, if you're not careful, okay? But this is part of the environment. So this is very different than urban Korea, for example. This is urban Dar es Salaam. And so we're exiting campus, moving past the parking lot there, the professor's parking lot. And now we're on the Dala Dala. The Dala Dala is the normal, typical transport here, just a bus that you get on, takes you to places, it's got set routes and so forth. And what was really very interesting about my experience with Ndoto, my friendship with her, is that we became friends to the point where she asked me to join her on an additional sojourn in the country during their sort of break time, spring break sort of time. And so I said, well, yeah, sure, okay. I mean, I thought I was just a researcher, but now I'm a friend. That's great. And having this opportunity to spend time with her gave us additional time to talk more about her intercultural experience. That has really helped me reflect more about what being in Tanzania meant to me as an African-American woman, as somebody who has studied Swahili for a very long time, but then, to put myself in her shoes, right? Somebody who learned Swahili only once they were on the ground and came from a very different country from my own. And so I'm piecing together little pictures here for you of afternoon traffic as we're exiting the city, right? Further on. And here we are out in the open road behind a bus, and the sort of rubber plate there at the bottom of the bus says, "Shut up, let me steer you." Okay, so people are real cheeky out there on the road. And pineapples in abundance. It was really phenomenal, all that we saw as we're journeying to the north of Tanzania. But together, we are able to share these further experiences, and I think this is stuff that researchers don't typically talk about or include when we write up a really explicit study. We sort of say, we're just going to do the academics. But when you think about it, all of this is part of how we get to those academic sort of really concise statements about what's occurring and all that I learned, right? And you can see there on the table, I've got my Lonely Planet there. We were really planning this trip together. And we were planning it in conjunction, in collaboration with our driver. We hired a local taxi driver from the city, from Dar es Salaam, to drive us the 6 hours it took to get all the way up to the north. And we saw so much that interfaced us with more of the history of Tanzania and made me even more aware of how our presence in that particular moment was building upon the history of this region's interaction with Asia and with empire all throughout the history of influence from Persia and the whole Arabian Peninsula. And so it became sort of a broader project in interfacing with the socio-history of our identities in that space. And all that became possible because of the time and the friendship that we put in with one another. And I should say, we're still in touch now. So sometimes these friendships that we find to be at sort of just the nascent part of doing our research can be things that actually change us for the long term. And interfacing with the mountain range up there, which is absolutely phenomenal. I really encourage you all to check out Tanzania as just a tourist destination, okay? And maybe you'll learn some Swahili along the way. These women are selling tomatoes and plums out here in the mountains. And this sign along the side of the road says, "Avoid accidents, drive carefully," right? And this is really important because not only did we see as we got further and further away from the city, the urban center of Tanzania, that Swahili was used in more abundance, but this was an interesting thing for her to see, that the import of Swahili, as opposed to English outside of that urban center, particularly as she had come with this interest in studying English. More pineapples, somebody's taking some pineapples. And then, our trip sort of concluded. You can see that's our taxi that we took, and our driver had picked up some fish to take home, as you do apparently, and just hang them outside of the car. I don't know. But we stopped for coconuts, right? And I think, our time together really brought out further intercultural insights and encouraged a further self-reflexive standpoint from my angle. And right now, I should say, I just got back the first reviews on my book manuscript, one reviewer was totally okay with it, right? The other reviewer was like, I don't understand your narrative take. Why are you telling us about the chilly environment of the office room? Why are you telling us about the taste of the coconut and all that? And so I'm still having to write the introduction for the book, but it is forcing me to have to come up with vocabulary to talk about why this particular narrative approach and approach to describing the interactions with the environment and with the folks in the environment is so important to me, right? And to sort of say that maybe this is like weird for some people, right? They're like, why are you spending time on this stuff? Just tell us the ins and outs, just make the statements. But for me, really passing through these spaces means in passing through different levels of awareness with environment, with food, with all the things that have made this into a memorable experience and worth studying from these various standpoints. And even part of that, going to that coastal region, was thinking about the slave trade and how that was a part of our interaction. So there's just so much a part of this that was important to me. And returning again to the city center, and I'll stop there because there's more to the project, and there's more, I guess, to defining what the impact of thinking in this self-reflexive way does to our work. But my book title is there, and I'm hoping that I can get to work and think about Reviewer 2 and work with her. But that's the next stage of work. So thank you so much.